It seems like that every large and well-industrialized country has its own national car company. Germany, the UK, France, Spain, Italy, United States, they all have their national car companies. But the Netherlands? Not really. Volkswagen seems to be the German replacement of our national car company. It is the Volkswagen Golf and Volkswagen Polo that always seem to top the sales charts. But it didn't used to be like that. Because welcome everyone to the 9th episode in the Automotive History series, where we are going to take a look at the history of the Dutch car industry. Let's jump back some 100 years or so. At the turn of the century, you had this new thing called an automobile or horseless carriage, and there were a lot of people that wanted to join in on this emerging market. But as quickly the newfound small-time car companies arose, they also quickly disappeared, after just making maybe one or two models. The Netherlands were no exception to the rule, except for one car company, Spijker. The Vandoren Brothers already had a long-standing tradition of making carriages, including the Golden Carriage, a coach once used by the Dutch royal family. But by the turn of the century they decided to start building automobiles. And the first car was launched in 1900. They built a vehicle under license of Benz. Yes, that is this Benz. And it had a 2-cylinder 2 or 5 horsepower engine. But the real treat came in 1903 with the Spijker 60 HP. And that car was revolutionary in every conceivable way. And the name is exactly what it implies. The car had 60 horsepower, a top speed of an astronomical 110 kilometers an hour. That was really a big deal back then. The 60 horsepower came from an 8.6 liter 6-cylinder, and that was a novelty. It was the very first car to have a 6-cylinder, as well as 4-wheel brakes and 4-wheel drive. All in all, very futuristic for that time period. After that, Spijker made some other car models, but by the early 1920s they unfortunately went bankrupt due to mismanagement, but still managed to produce about 2,000 models over time. And then, nothingness. In the following 30 years, almost nobody took an attempt to create a new car company, and then the Second World War happens, you know how it goes. The Netherlands was heavily affected by the Second World War, was in ruins, and we had some other things on our mind than to start up a new car company. That was until the mid-50s. After the Second World War, work was abound, and that led to an economic boom. The wealth of the average man increased greatly, and he could finally afford luxury products in the 50s, like a refrigerator or television or a brand new car. Because before that, the car was more or less a status symbol usually owned by the wealthier people. Or, as my grandmother recalls it, the only one in town that had a car was the doctor, because he had to visit the patients at home. But now the average man could finally afford a car, and it almost turned out into an unofficial competition who was the first in the neighborhood to get that brand new TV or car. These cars that people bought as their very first car were usually very small and honest little cars. My grandfather, for instance, his very first car was a Fiat 600. And for a trip to Luxembourg, he had to cram in himself, his wife, my grandmother, his 2 children, an inflatable boat, a parasol, folding chairs, a blanket, and a bunch of other stuff. In a 600. Go figure. But people were happy with it, because after all, it's just a small difference between owning a small car and a big car, but a huge difference between owning a small car or not having a car at all. People were even so happy that it led to an entirely Dutch phenomenon: roadside tourism. Ooh. What is roadside tourism? Well, it goes like this. You get into your brand new car, you go to your local highway, you park your car on the side of the road, you fold out the chairs, you grab a drink, and you just sit and gaze upon all that mechanical splendor passing by. And was this a safe and healthy activity? I don't know, just get me another cigarette. And if that wasn't enough, people were glad that they were stuck in the very first traffic jam in the Netherlands on May 29, 1955. People flocked to the road when they heard on the news where the traffic jam took place, and looked at all the cars, and people were proud to stand in line because it was a novelty, it was something new. Truly different times. Meet the Vandoren Brothers. They were the owners of Duff, which stands for Vandoren's Aanhangwagenfabriek, or directly translated, Vandoren's Trailer Factory. They were known for constructing quality buses and freight trucks, and trailers, of course. And they continue to do so today. And in the mid-50s, they were like, hey, we could potentially make a lot of money off of this new emerging car market. We should make a car. And so they did, introducing the Duff 600. A small, two-door economy car with an air-cooled twin-cylinder engine, drum brakes and trendy rear fins. And a design generic enough that it could also be an Auto Bianchi, BMW, Glas, Lloyd, Neckar, NSU, Steyr-Puch, Trabant, Vespa, Citroën, DKW, Fiat, Panhard or Saab. But nope, it's a Duff, an entirely Dutch product. One could say that it was an average car in a market that was already quite competitive. However, it had one major trick up its sleeve. It had an automatic. Yes, that is weird, because automatics, especially in mid-50s Europe, was considered a luxury item only found on the more expensive Jaguars and Mercedes. So how the hell did an automatic find its way in such a small economy car? What the Duff 600 had was an entirely new type of automatic transmission. A CVT, a continuously variable transmission. And I dare to say that that is probably the biggest contribution the Dutch car industry has ever brought to the worldwide automotive industry. It gave birth to the CVT. It was an original idea by the Vandoren Brothers. Now I'm not gonna explain how this CVT works, but it comes down to this. Why would you have a complex system of multiple linkages when 2 rubber bands is all you need? It allowed the transmission to be rather simple, compact and cost effective. And suddenly the Duff 600 was a small economy car with a big luxury car feature. The official name of the CVT was Variomatic, but it quickly gained the nickname Het Pinterpookje, which directly translates to the smart shifter. With an automatic, the car became very easy to operate, and now the little lady could also drive it. And it wasn't for long until the car kind of received a dull image, usually driven by your grandmother, your aunt, or your mother-in-law. You starting to get the picture? Anyway, the Variomatic CVT allowed the Duff to go as fast as it could go forwards, backwards. And that led to another entirely Dutch phenomenon, backwards racing. Especially in the late 1970s and 1980s, when these Duffs were cheap to come by, they were often chosen in the class of backwards racing. Because, well, they were practically the only one that could drive that fast in reverse. They were essentially the Formula 1 in their own class. I'm not even kidding. And by the way, if you have some spare time, just look it up. Dutch backward racing. It's amazing. Although the Duff 600 had an amazing transmission, it was very slow. It received some updates and new model generations throughout the 60s and 70s, but by the late 70s, it just suffered from its granny car image, slow acceleration, and the fact that people loved it more to see a Duff crashing backwards than racing forwards. And so by the early 70s it was Volvo that knocked on the Dutch door. They took over Duff, and some Duffs became Volvos and some Volvos became Duffs. But by the mid-70s, Duff was no longer. It was sticking too long to the same models instead of investing in new ones, what was the eventual downfall. And that's it. Literally, because after that there has been no Dutch car company of any significance. Fast forward to 1999. A man by the name of Maarten de Bruin launched Spyker Cars. More or less a reintroduction of the Spyker car company I talked about earlier in the video. But this time they made crazy hypercars like the Spyker Sylvestris and the more well-known Spyker C8. Maarten de Bruin eventually left the company, and now it was fully in the hands of Victor Muller. You know, you have those people that whatever they touch turns into gold, but whatever Victor Muller touches turns into complete shit. Spyker was nowhere near a big car manufacturer, but they had the balls to buy Saab from General Motors in the early 2010s. And boy, was that a bright idea. Saab went bust in 2011, and Spyker was also going to turn out into one big sob story, or should I say, Saab story. Today, the Netherlands lack a national car company, but it doesn't mean there is no car production altogether. A factory originally set up for the production of the Duff now makes BMWs and Minis. And Tesla has a big assembly plant just outside Tilburg, where it produces Model S's and Model X's for the European market. And last but not least, the Netherlands is home to a bunch of special vehicle manufacturers, like Alfax, Burton, Donkervoort, and the best of them all, can I get a drum roll? Kanta.